Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida pledged to make it possible for some 85% of fathers to take parental leave from their jobs by 2030. The incentive is aimed at tackling the falling birth rate.
Instead of actually listening to the women and the people for what they want, they incentivize birth with money. Meanwhile, childbirth is still not covered by the national health insurance. Over-the-counter pills are unavailable. Abortion pills are not approved. Male parental leave rate minimal.
Japan is facing a demographic crisis. So big cities like Tokyo are a magnet to young people because of their high earning opportunities and also educational opportunities.
Japan's government wants families to move out of the crowded capital Tokyo and has significantly boosted a one-time grant to kick things along. It's now worth 1 million yen per child, which is about $7,500 US.
In the 2030s, the young population in Japan will decline at twice the current rate. The next 6 to 7 years will be the last chance to turn around the declining birth rate.
In just 15 years, Japan's population has shrunk by over 2 million people. By 2100, the country could lose half its population entirely. This isn't a prediction from a dystopian novel. It's the mathematical reality facing the world's third largest economy right now. In rural prefectures like Akita and Aomori, entire communities have lost over 1/3 of their residents since 1990, leaving behind empty schools and abandoned homes. While other nations grapple with immigration debates, Japan confronts something far more existential. With fewer than 721,000 births against 1.62 million deaths in 2024, Japan's population falls faster every year. The birth rate has plummeted to 1.20, far below the 2.1 needed for survival. What happens when an entire civilization begins to vanish? The numbers tell a story that political rhetoric cannot change.
The mathematics of national extinction.
Behind these stark statistics lies a mathematical framework that reveals Japan's demographic trajectory with scientific precision. The arithmetic of population collapse operates according to predictable patterns, independent of political rhetoric or wishful thinking. When deaths consistently exceed births by substantial margins, the mathematical outcome becomes inevitable regardless of government intervention attempts. The stark mathematical reality centers on Japan's current demographic equation: 720,988 births against 1.62 million deaths annually, creating a net population loss exceeding 880,000 people each year. Japan's fertility rate of 1.20 children per woman stands dramatically below the 2.1 replacement threshold required for population stability. This gap represents more than statistical variance. It constitutes systematic demographic failure. These numbers compound exponentially, accelerating the decline with each passing year. Medium-term demographic models project Japan's population declining to 75 to 80 million by 2100, representing a reduction of nearly 40% from current levels. Government forecasts typically incorporate assumptions about policy effectiveness and behavioral changes that have yet to materialize. Academic researchers using purely mathematical models based on current trends project outcomes that challenge official optimism about demographic recovery. The compound effect of declining births creates progressively smaller cohorts of future parents, establishing an accelerating downward spiral that becomes increasingly difficult to reverse. Each generation of reduced births produces fewer potential mothers and fathers for the subsequent generation. This mathematical reality means that even if Japan suddenly achieved replacement-level fertility, the population would continue shrinking for decades due to the reduced number of women in their childbearing years. Regional variations demonstrate how this mathematical progression manifests across different areas, with rural regions experiencing population drops of 30 to 40% within single decades. Prefectures like Akita and Aomori have lost more than 1/3 of their residents since 1990, creating ghost towns and abandoned infrastructure. These regional patterns foreshadow national trends, showing how demographic decline affects community viability, economic sustainability, and social cohesion. Mathematical models indicate that the tipping point for irreversible decline may have already occurred. making recovery scenarios increasingly implausible without unprecedented intervention. Demographic momentum works against Japan, even if policies successfully increase birth rates tomorrow. The reduced number of women currently in their 20s and 30s limits the maximum possible births over the next 2 decades, regardless of fertility improvements. Japan confronts a demographic equation with no easy mathematical solutions, where conventional policy approaches struggle against the inexorable logic of population dynamics. Understanding these numerical realities becomes essential for evaluating whether standard government interventions can meaningfully alter Japan's trajectory.
The failure of financial engineering.
Japan has spent trillions on birth incentives over 2 decades, yet the fertility rate fell from 1.30 to 1.20 between 2012 and 2023, indicating money alone hasn't moved the needle. The government operates under the assumption that financial barriers prevent family formation, launching comprehensive support programs that address monetary concerns while ignoring deeper societal obstacles. This approach treats demographic decline as a market failure requiring economic intervention rather than recognizing it as a reflection of fundamental cultural and structural incompatibilities with modern family life. Japan's financial incentive programs focus on 2 primary supports. The government provides 500,000 yen per birth and offers discounts on nursery school fees, alongside various tax breaks and family support funds. Despite these extensive measures, families still face additional expenses in roughly 45% of cases, revealing incomplete coverage. These programs represent substantial public investment, consuming significant portions of government budgets while producing measurably negligible results on actual birth rates. The paradox becomes clear when examining countries with different approaches. France and Sweden achieved partial success in reversing declining birth rates not through cash alone, but by combining financial incentives with generous parental leave and accessible childcare within broader cultural frameworks that support work-life balance. These nations demonstrate that effective demographic policy requires integrated approaches addressing multiple dimensions of family formation simultaneously. However, direct policy transfers face challenges due to cultural differences, making adaptation rather than replication the appropriate strategy for Japan. Japan's rising national burden ratio creates a counterproductive cycle that undermines its own demographic goals. Nearly half of working adults' income now goes to taxes and social insurance premiums, reducing their capacity to start families despite government support programs. This high burden, driven by the need to support the growing elderly population, reduces the very resources that young adults require for family formation. The mathematical reality demonstrates how demographic decline creates fiscal pressures that compound the original problem.
Financial incentives clash with societal expectations about career advancement, particularly affecting university-educated women who face impossible choices between professional development and family formation. Economic uncertainty and job insecurity make young adults risk-averse about family formation, regardless of available financial support, while cultural expectations maintain traditional gender roles that conflict with modern economic realities.
Financial incentives treat symptoms rather than addressing the structural barriers preventing family formation, revealing fundamental limitations of economic solutions to cultural problems. Japan's approach demonstrates why demographic recovery demands comprehensive transformation rather than monetary adjustments to existing systems. The real obstacles to family formation lie not in government budgets, but in the daily realities of Japanese professional life.
The cultural architecture of decline.
These workplace realities reveal how Japan's corporate culture has made parenthood professionally unviable for an entire generation of ambitious professionals. Corporate Japan operates on principles that fundamentally conflict with family formation, creating systematic barriers that no amount of government financial support can overcome. The nation's employment framework treats parenthood as incompatible with professional success, forcing workers to choose between career advancement and reproductive fulfillment. Japan's corporate culture generates structural obstacles to family formation through extreme working hours, rigid hierarchical systems, and inflexible scheduling that makes parenting professionally devastating. Companies expect employees to demonstrate loyalty through excessive overtime, weekend availability, and participation in after-work social obligations that consume time essential for family relationships. This culture operates independently of official policies, creating informal but powerful pressures that discourage family formation among career-focused individuals. The government simultaneously calls for higher birth rates while maintaining workplace systems that make parenting professionally destructive, revealing a fundamental contradiction in Japanese policy approaches. Political leaders advocate for demographic recovery through speeches and financial incentives, while avoiding the systemic reforms necessary to make parenthood viable within existing corporate structures. This disconnect exposes how demographic policies fail when they address symptoms rather than underlying cultural barriers. Japanese work culture mandates overtime as standard practice and imposes severe career penalties on women who take maternity leave, despite legal provisions for parental leave that remain underutilized due to informal quotas limiting advancement opportunities for employees who utilize family-related benefits. More than 50% of women work irregular jobs with substantially lower annual incomes, particularly married women with children, demonstrating how the employment system pushes mothers out of regular employment and discriminates against family formation. Patriarchal working conditions force women to choose between career advancement and motherhood, with most selecting professional security due to economic necessity and social expectations. Among women aged 30 to 40, only 45% of those with regular employment have children, compared to approximately 70% of those with irregular jobs, highlighting how career ambitions conflict with family formation. University-educated women face particularly acute pressures as their educational investments require sustained professional commitment that conflicts with traditional motherhood expectations. Marriage rates correlate strongly with birth rates in Japan, where workplace demands delay marriage and subsequently reduce fertility windows available to couples. Many women avoid marriage because they recognize it will not improve their happiness given existing cultural constraints. The demanding work environment postpones relationship formation during prime reproductive years, creating demographic consequences that extend beyond individual career decisions. Japan's demographic crisis reflects cultural values that systematically prioritize economic productivity over human reproduction and family formation. These deeply embedded workplace structures create demographic consequences that challenge the nation's survival. Yet changing them requires confronting fundamental assumptions about economic success and social organization that extend far beyond employment policies alone.
The immigration paradox.
While other developed nations leverage immigration to address aging populations, Japan maintains restrictive policies that prioritize cultural homogeneity over demographic stabilization. The nation's immigration framework operates as a deliberate barrier to population growth, reflecting deep-seated preferences for ethnic uniformity that distinguish Japan from virtually every other developed nation confronting similar aging challenges. This approach reveals fundamental differences in how societies balance cultural preservation against demographic survival.
Japan's immigration policies prevent meaningful demographic relief through severely limited pathways to permanent residency and citizenship, creating insurmountable obstacles for potential immigrants who could address population decline. Despite admitting a net social increase of 340,000 foreign residents, restrictive citizenship pathways prevent long-term demographic stabilization. The country maintains complex bureaucratic processes, language requirements that exceed practical necessity, and cultural integration expectations that discourage permanent settlement. These barriers operate systematically to preserve Japan's ethnic homogeneity while preventing the demographic relief that immigration provides other developed nations. Canada demonstrates successful immigration integration that maintains distinct cultural identity while accepting demographic diversity, processing approximately 400,000 immigrants annually through structured programs that balance economic needs with cultural integration. This massive intake contrasts sharply with Japan's negligible permanent immigration numbers, highlighting how other advanced economies leverage migration without losing cultural identity. Australia similarly manages large-scale immigration through comprehensive integration frameworks that preserve national character while welcoming newcomers. These nations prove that strategic immigration policies can address demographic decline without compromising cultural integrity. Political resistance to immigration persists despite clear evidence that it represents the most viable short-term solution to demographic decline, creating fundamental contradictions between survival needs and cultural preferences. Political leaders resist immigration liberalization due to electoral fears, recognizing that advocating significant increases risks political consequences. This dynamic perpetuates restrictive policies despite expert consensus that immigration provides the most effective short-term demographic intervention available. Japan's aging workforce creates severe labor shortages across multiple sectors, particularly healthcare and construction, where immigrant workers could provide essential relief while supporting strained social security systems. The healthcare sector faces critical staffing shortages as elderly populations require increasing care, while construction industries struggle to maintain infrastructure with diminishing workforces. Immigration could address these shortages immediately, while contributing tax revenue to support pension systems stressed by demographic imbalance. Japan's homogeneous cultural identity creates unique implementation challenges that differ fundamentally from multicultural societies with established integration frameworks. The nation lacks institutional experience managing ethnic diversity, creating additional barriers to successful immigration policy development. Cultural expectations about social conformity conflict with the diversity that immigration necessarily introduces, complicating solutions even when demographic necessity becomes apparent.
Japan's immigration paradox represents a fundamental choice between cultural preservation and demographic survival, where maintaining ethnic homogeneity conflicts directly with population stabilization requirements. This dilemma extends beyond policy preferences to deeper questions about national adaptability when facing existential demographic pressures that challenge traditional approaches to governance and social organization.
Japan's demographic crisis represents a preview of challenges facing all developed nations, making its policy choices a crucial test case for 21st century civilization. South Korea, Italy, and Germany already show similar declining birth rates, while China confronts its own demographic transition following decades of population control. Japan's struggle demonstrates whether advanced societies can adapt their fundamental structures to ensure survival.
The nation can implement radical reforms through three strategic options: massive immigration increases, comprehensive workplace restructuring, or unprecedented financial investment in family formation. However, each option requires abandoning core cultural principles that define Japanese identity. The fundamental challenge remains balancing cultural preservation against demographic survival. Japan risks becoming a smaller, less dynamic economy if it doesn't adapt, affecting not only its own future, but global economic balances.
Which of these bold strategies do you think Japan must adopt? Let us know in the comments below.